Hello there everyone, welcome back to Pharmacy for the People, where I try to put your health back in your hands by breaking down complex medical issues into bite-sized morsels. My name is James, I'm a licensed practicing pharmacist. Let's get going. In the last video about vaccines, I introduced what the purpose of vaccines is, how they do what they do, and a brief historical perspective on how they came about. If you've not seen that, go away, take a look at it, and then come back. Go ahead. For the rest of you, in this episode and the next, we are going to jump 2 feet in and start talking about how over a short matter of years, we've transitioned from celebrating the end of diseases like polio and smallpox, measles, rubella, to the word vaccines basically becoming a 4-letter word in our culture. So how do we get here? Why are vaccines so controversial? There are many reasons why controversies get introduced into any practice. And in the case of vaccines, I think the controversies are rooted in a beautiful soil, the health and safety of our children. Since their development, vaccines in our children has been surrounded by concerns about their safety and efficacy. Most vaccines are given to children at various times throughout their development, and when coupled with the pain and the mystery of sudden sickness or death in a child, the safety and efficacy of everything comes into question. As I'm recording this, my daughter is 19 days old. She is a constant source of joy for me in these troubled times. I cannot fathom the pain of saying goodbye to her. I'd easily give all that I am and all that I have for her, and if she was sick, I'd be beside myself. So as we start talking about the controversy of vaccines, let me be perfectly clear about this. No skepticism regarding our children's health is unwarranted. And as we move into the meat of this episode and the next, my hope is to offer you the very best chance for the ones that you love, and absolutely no ill will towards your desire to give everything you have for your children. I'll be direct about this information, and when appropriate, I'll call a spade a spade. But I applaud and I join you in your desire to protect the lives of these little ones. So let's talk about some of these controversies. There is far too much information for me to cover in a reasonable amount of time, so let's consider this a highlights reel. I'll do my best to give each topic the depth it deserves without bludgeoning a deceased equine, but it is going to be a difficult balance. You also may notice a few big name controversies missing from this episode. You may find those in the next episode, or I may not cover those. Like I said, I can only cover so much, and I'm going to link as many resources as I can in the description that will go into far more depth than I'm able to in the amount of time that we have together. Okay, controversy number 1, let's talk about side effects. Unfortunately, almost no medical intervention is without side effects, because in order to produce an intended effect, most of the time you also pose the risk of an unintended effect. I'll do an episode later about the side effects of medications in general, but not this day. We don't really have time for that, but we do need to talk about side effects in vaccines. I got my second dose of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine yesterday, and at this point, I am unable to tell the difference between potential side effects I might be suffering and having been up with my daughter at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and 6 a.m. My arm's sore, though. This really hurts. But I thought it was a really convenient time to start talking about side effects of vaccines. So what we need is an honest way to assess what is the risk of getting a side effect from a vaccine, a way to tell if that is actually from the vaccine itself or just from living life, and a way to tell which is more dangerous, getting the disease itself or the vaccine. So let's start there. Luckily, the CDC has been collecting data on vaccines for a few decades now through a system called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS for short. Patients, parents, physicians, anybody can report to this, and all the data is publicly available. I put the link in the description for your personal perusal if you want to. Just be warned that the system will output things in a raw format, and it can be pretty difficult to look at everything. You're not going to see a statistical analysis, you're just going to see a event-by-event layout. The CDC uses this information to pursue patterns and risks to patients in vaccines. It's incredibly helpful, but it has a few steep limitations. One of the biggest limitations to VAERS is that it can't actually tell if the event was caused by a vaccine or if it was just correlated with a vaccine. Correlation versus causation is a big issue in life in general, and I mentioned it in a previous video. In short, because we have so many things happening in our lives all the time, it becomes really difficult to definitively say that A caused B. We can say that A is associated with B, but showing that A caused B is more difficult, which is one of the reasons that the scientific process is so helpful for us. It breaks down our misperceptions and everything, helps us to give us a more clear direction, a clear link between those things. Seriously, you should go back and watch that video. Statistically, over time, patterns emerge and studies can be conducted looking for more clear evidence of a causal link between vaccine and adverse event. Another limitation to VAERS is that because reporting is kind of random and accessible to anyone at any time, it's possible that you may see swings in report trending based on current events. For instance, if you had a lawyer's office run an ad during the Super Bowl where a lot of people saw it and it said,
"If you or someone you love has experienced an ingrown hair after receiving an MMR vaccine, you may be entitled to compensation."
Suddenly it's on everybody's minds, right? Forgive the cheap metaphor, but suddenly we may see an uptick in reporting in the VAERS system that may or may not actually be correlated with a vaccine. It's just correlated with people thinking about something. But like I mentioned, if a pattern starts to emerge in the data, further studies can be done to create, to more solidify this causal link between the vaccine and a serious side effect or any side effect. Such studies have been done in many different occasions. Now, I agonized over ways that I could communicate the findings of some of these studies in an efficient and effective way, and I've decided that it's simply not possible. So again, I'll include sources for your own perusal down below, and we'll just consider this a rough summary. In terms of minor side effects, let's start with minor side effects. Like I said in my last video, minor side effects associated with vaccinations are generally because the immune system is responding to it. If you're not familiar with that, go back and look at that last video and see if it makes sense to you. But generally speaking, fever, soreness, soreness in my arm, chills, headache, nausea, etc. The immune system is beginning to respond to what the vaccine has put inside of you. That's the point, right? Again, if you haven't watched the previous video, please go back. Most of these mild side effects can be ameliorated with over-the-counter medication like Tylenol. So let's talk about serious side effects. Serious side effects are much more along the lines of things that we need to discuss in terms of the controversy of getting a vaccination. Again, rough summary of these studies that have been done to look at these different likelihoods. The likelihood of having a serious side effect or dying in response to a vaccination is 1 in millions or tens of millions or even less. On the other hand, the likelihood of suffering serious disease or dying in response to the infection vaccines are designed to fight is 1 in thousands. Let's put that in practical terms. With 331-ish million people in the United States, if we vaccinated 100% of those people with the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, we might see between 30 and 300 serious effects or deaths. If we vaccinated 0% of the population and measles ripped through the population again, we could see up to 300,000 serious illnesses or deaths. These are rough and dirty numbers that make a lot of assumptions and they don't have a solid statistical analysis. However, the point I'm attempting to make here is that based on the data we have of the last 30 years, the serious risks associated with vaccines are roughly 1,000 times less than the serious risks of the disease itself.
I forgot to mention when I was originally recording this, some of the worst side effects associated with vaccines, like idiopathic thrombocytic purpura from the MMR vaccine and Guillain-Barré syndrome from the flu vaccine, are caused more frequently in the actual disease than as a quote-unquote side effect of the vaccine. That is, you are more likely to get idiopathic thrombocytic purpura from measles than you are from the MMR vaccine. You are more likely to get Guillain-Barré syndrome from the influenza itself than you are from the flu vaccine. Okay, Onward.
Now, that does not excuse the 30 to 300 serious effects or deaths from the vaccine. A single death is a tragedy and it should be mourned. And as our technology develops and our understanding of these things grows, we should be able to apply that to vaccines and help to reduce that number. That's exactly what a lot of us are hoping for in this new COVID-19 vaccine. Now's not the time to jump down into that chasm, but that's what we're hoping for. Okay, in a nutshell, that is serious side effects. And again, I'm going to link the data down below so that you can fact check me as you wish to. But overall, what we're looking at is a far higher risk of a serious effect or death from the disease that's being prevented by the vaccine than from getting something associated with the vaccine itself. Okay, controversy number 2, let's talk about ingredients. The ingredients used in vaccines are arguably even more controversial than the possible side effects. You can do a quick internet search for vaccine ingredients and get anything from the actual manufacturer's disclosure to a blog post based on hearing from a friend's sister who read a book written by an ex-secretary of a dentist's office. So where do you start when you're trying to evaluate the safety of vaccine ingredients? I would start with the prescribing information or the package insert for whatever vaccine you're looking at. The FDA requires that each medication approved for use has a fully disclosed list of active and inactive ingredients. Don't think that companies are just going to pull a fast one on you and not include something. That's called misbranding. And it's subject to fines, penalties, and even shutdowns. You can find prescribing information that includes a full list of ingredients either on the manufacturer's website or in the National Library of Medicine website, Daily Med, which is something I use very regularly, and I will link it below. Okay, so once you have a reliable list of ingredients that actually show up in a medication or a vaccine, then what? Let's start broadly, and then we'll focus in on specifics. So broadly, the FDA Kefauver-Harris Amendment from 1962 requires that all medications, including vaccines, approved, they have to be shown to be safe and effective before they make it to the market. Does that mean that all ingredients in medications are safe? So that kind of depends. If you have an allergy to eggs and the manufacturer uses chicken albumin as part of the process, no, that would not be safe for you to get that vaccine. The first stop on the can I get this express is, do you have any allergies to the ingredients? So if you have known documented allergies, ask your pharmacist or your physician or nurse before you get a vaccine. Ask if it's safe for you. If they don't know, they can look it up. So what about the rest of us? If we don't have known allergies, are the ingredients safe? The maxim I'm about to use may sound oversimplified to a fault, but its application dictates an overwhelming percentage of the decision-making in medicine. The dose makes the poison. The dose makes the poison. There are substances that in one portion are good for us and in other portions are completely deadly. The proportion of a substance in your body can be the difference between an intended effect or unintended side effects. Like take digitoxin and the foxglove flower. In small portions, in the right proportion, it can be used to treat heart failure. But if you go outside and you just start munching on a big foxglove plant, it will likely kill you. Even water, life-giving, hydrating, necessary for life water. If you just start cranking down pitchers of water, it's going to mess with you. If you consume it in massive quantities, it can kill you. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to make the point that the dose makes the poison. We ingest things by accident all the time. Things get into our bodies all the time, but because they're in such a small quantity, we may not feel any effect of that whatsoever. With that in mind, let's look at some specific vaccine ingredient controversies. Are there toxic ingredients in vaccines? There are ingredients in vaccines that by name would be considered toxic. But in the quantities they exist in vaccines, no, you could not call them toxic. The most commonly listed toxic ingredients I hear about are aluminum, formaldehyde, and mercury. So let's start with those. Aluminum. Aluminum is an adjuvant in vaccines. It's used in hepatitis A, hepatitis B vaccines, the Tdap vaccine, and some others. Physiologically, aluminum is eliminated by the kidneys, which is important because we eat a lot of aluminum every single day, because aluminum is in fruits, vegetables, plants, nuts, seeds. It's in drinks. So we are ingesting it and eliminating it on a regular basis. It's the third most abundant element in the world. It makes up a significant portion of the crust of the earth. The reason that we're picking up aluminum from these plants, vegetables, nuts, etc., isn't because they're not organic or whatever. It's just because it's in the soil. It's part of what is growing in plants. Okay, so the bottom line about aluminum and vaccines is that in the first 6 months of life, our children get more aluminum in their diet through breastfeeding or formula feeding or whatever than they get from vaccines. Formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is one of those chemicals that we associate in our minds as embalming fluid. It's the solution that you encounter when you first dissect an animal in biology class. So the thought that it might be in vaccines is like, what the heck? What are you trying to do to my baby? Why would you give this toxic formaldehyde to my child? Formaldehyde is used in some vaccines like the Tdap, the hepatitis A, meningococcal vaccines, etc. But while formaldehyde is toxic in high concentrations, it's also a natural byproduct of metabolism in our bodies. We have formaldehyde circulating in our bloodstream all the time. The dose makes the poison. In our infants, the average amount of formaldehyde that's in their blood already is 10 to 1,000 times higher than is in any given vaccine. Okay, so for mercury, I'm going to wait until the next episode because that is a big can of worms that's going to require some more in-depth, longer segment. Let's jump down now to what about DNA and RNA in vaccines? Well, most of the DNA or RNA that's included in vaccines is just fragmented parts left over from the manufacturing process. And the concern for those is usually twofold. Number one, can it create a protein inside of our body? Because DNA and RNA can get transcribed into proteins. And number two, can this DNA or RNA be incorporated into our own DNA? In terms of creating a protein by accident, the fragments of DNA or RNA left over in vaccines are usually so small that they can't form a functional protein. So the risk of that is very, very, very low. Okay, regarding that genetic material incorporating into our own DNA, our DNA is kept within the walled nucleus of the cell. And it's maintained by a system of high fidelity record keeping, basically. There's a lot of things that keep our DNA. So genetic material that originates outside of that nucleus cannot incorporate itself into our DNA. It's not possible. Consider this. When we get a virus works by injecting its genetic material, whether it's DNA or RNA, into our cells and then using our cells' components to rebuild multiple versions of that virus and then release that virus further out into our body. If every time RNA or DNA was exposed to our cells, if it incorporated itself into our DNA and our genetic code would get changed every single time we get a cold. And it just doesn't work that way. We'd very much like to use it that way when we're talking about gene modification therapy to correct unfortunate genetic mutations, but it doesn't work that way. So what about the mRNA used in the COVID-19 vaccines? So Pfizer and Moderna both have a mRNA-based vaccine. mRNA is the material that takes the information of your DNA, your double helix DNA, and delivers it outside of the nucleus to the ribosome. The ribosome then reads it and translates it into a protein, and that protein is then folded and serves a function. In the case of the COVID-19 vaccine, the mRNA is delivered into the cell. It's read by the ribosomes to create the spike protein of the virus. That spike protein is then presented on the outside of our cells. Our immune system sees it, recognizes it, has the immune response. And then that mRNA inside the cell, after being read a few times by the ribosome, gets degraded like all other RNA does. So the spike protein doesn't cause any disease in our body. So in this instance, it still can't incorporate itself into our DNA, but it's specifically intended to produce proteins by having whole, unfractionated genetic information available in the vaccine. What about the use of aborted fetal tissue in vaccines? In vaccines that use viruses as part of the design, it becomes necessary to grow the virus in a lab. This is a source of great frustration. Much of the work done in the early 1900s to identify and eliminate communicable diseases was focused on the inability to grow the virus the way that we needed to in a lab. As I mentioned earlier, viruses replicate by using the internal components of other cells. Just like a bacteria comes in and they multiply and divide on their own, viruses use our cells or an animal cells or whatever it's infecting to do that. So scientists studied multiple types of cells that could be grown in a lab so that we could further study and manipulate viruses themselves. Sometimes animal cells worked for particular viruses, sometimes they didn't. They tried many different things. There were many great breakthroughs, but ultimately there was a lot of frustration and failed attempts to grow these viruses. So in the 1960s, a few scientists tried stem cells from 2 babies that were aborted due to medical complications. They were able to use these fetal cells to grow the viruses necessary to focus on creating vaccines. It was hailed as a marvel of science and a great breakthrough. It was a significant breakthrough. There are a few fetal cell lines, but the 2 most famous ones are the WI38 and the MRC5 cell lines. These 2 cell lines have been duplicated over and over and over again in the last 60 years and are continued to be used today in vaccines like the hepatitis A, the MMR, and the rabies vaccines. And there's more. So with these fetal cell lines, the controversy isn't as much health-related as it is morality-related. Since their inception, it's estimated that the WI38 cell line alone has saved 11 million lives. So the question is, do the lives saved justify the use of aborted baby cells? I'm not going to derail our current topic to dive into ethical debate. It's the assumption that life is sacred that makes any life worth preserving or saving. I'm grateful for what the vaccines have done and the lives that they've been able to save. And I hope that in the future we'll be able to move away from using fetal cell lines in the use of vaccines. So let's do a recap. Gracious, this is so much information. And it's not even the end of the list. Today's topics represent a large chunk of concerns about vaccines that I've been presented with. The next episode, we're going to discuss controversies that depart from debate and move into more of the realm of perpetuated myth. But my last question of the day is, if vaccines are controversial, then why don't we just let those who feel comfortable with vaccines get vaccines, and those who don't feel comfortable with vaccines just avoid them? The answer there is a phrase that's been tossed around a lot in the media recently, and that phrase is herd immunity. Herd immunity is the idea that in large groups, if 70 to 80% of the group is immune to an infection, then if one of them contracts the infection, it won't spread. Besides the obvious of preventing disease spread, the reason that is important is because that there are people in our group, the societal group, who cannot mount a defense to infections. Their immune system is compromised in a way that they can't be vaccinated and they likely would not survive a serious infection. But by those of us who can get vaccinated, if we get vaccinated and we prevent the spread of disease to these people through this herd immunity, even if we ourselves have a great chance of surviving it, we serve the unfortunate in our community who may not survive. We would be serving those who are fighting through cancers and organ transplants and autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, and many others. In conclusion, with these specific controversies in mind, I believe that the pros of vaccination outweigh the cons. I hope that we as a scientific community will continue to make advancements towards eliminating these cons. And as a global community, we will continue to bring up our concerns and push for change and continue to serve the community as we wait for that change to be implemented. Thank you so much for hanging with me in this deluge of information on a very sensitive topic. I really appreciate you sticking with me. Please ask your questions down below. I know that I did not explain or give enough time for everything in the depth that it could have been. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Compare it to the chances of getting those side effects in seriously?